The story we are about to tell may be small, but it is also striking, and it dates back to the previous century. A century of wars and misery, but also of great prosperity and beauty. This story is based on some selected photographs from over 400 shots, which will be on show at Palazzo Grassi up until the start of 2024 for the Chronorama exhibition. On this occasion, we aren't asking you to be nostalgic for an era, but to try to observe our past with respect, care, and curiosity. The photos, taken between the 1910s and the 1970s, come from the Condé Nast archive, in part acquired in 2021 by the Pinol Collection. Who was Condé Nast? Condé Montrose Nast was born in New York in 1873 and was an important publisher and business person. After a long and successful experience as the head of advertising for Collier's Weekly magazine, at the age of 36, Condé Nast acquired a publication that would become the most important and influential in the world of fashion and style: Vogue. Today, Vogue has a global audience of about 268 million readers, but at the time, it was a magazine with a dwindling audience. Condé Nast's goal was to redesign the monthly, launch 2 new editions, one for England and one for France, and transform it into a point of reference for international elites. Anyone who wanted to be informed about the latest trends had to read Vogue, and then later on, Vanity Fair and House and Garden, the other 2 magazines that Condé Nast acquired in the following few years. To achieve this project, however, everything had to change, starting with a more conscious and imaginative style of photography. Condé Nast magazines thus became the testing grounds for some of the greatest masters of 20th century photography. These were young photographers such as Cecil Beaton and Man Ray, who constantly put into question bodies, identities, stares, and the moral significance of beauty. Well, if you're listening to this podcast, that's because you're at Palazzo Grassi. Or you're at home, traveling to Venice, or thinking of visiting the Chronorama exhibition. In any case, follow us. The first photo in our tale is the portrait of a woman dressed in a way which challenges the conventions of her time. Let's get to know her. In an essay published in 1924 titled Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Brown, writer Virginia Woolf wrote a brief and mysterious sentence that has been discussed in literary circles ever since. The sentence says, "On or about December 1910, human nature changed." A rather obscure statement open to several interpretations, but there is no doubt that in the 1910s and 1920s, many things were changing. For example, in the relationship between genders. One photograph in particular documents one of these changes. Taken in 1911 by Paul Thompson, a regularly published photographer and owner of a small photography agency in New York. According to archives, the photo belongs to Vanity Fair, but it was never published. It is now displayed in the first room on the first floor of Palazzo Grassi. In the image, we see a full-length portrait. We observe the figure, starting from the feet. She is wearing a pair of black shoes, a pair of dark pants, a jacket, gloves, a mink cloak, oval eyeglasses, and a top hat. Also, she's holding an umbrella in her right hand, and gripping a striped cloth tightly between her left fingers. Perhaps a piece of the American flag? What makes this photograph special is that the subject is a woman, dressed as a man, and wearing a pair of pants. It is worth remembering that, as absurd and unthinkable as it may seem today, no woman in the past would actually take the liberty of freely walking in the street wearing a pair of pants. The woman in the photo was named Mary Edwards Walker, better known as Dr. Mary Walker. She had served as a surgeon during the American Civil War and was an activist for women's rights, particularly for the right to vote and for dress reform. Mary was born in 1832 to singular parents, the founders of a free elementary school. From a young age, her parents encouraged her to think for herself. Throughout her life, she often dressed as a man, asserting her right to do so, partly because, in her view, women's clothing could be unhygienic, and in the case of corsets, uncomfortable and punishing. Because of her stubbornness in dressing like a man, she even ended up in jail. To those who asked her about her choices, she responded with a lucid and unassailable phrase: "I don't wear men's clothes, I wear my own clothes." In 1910, an English composer named Ethel Smith wrote March of the Woman, the anthem that would accompany the suffragettes in their demonstrations. A year later, Paul Thompson took the photo of Mary Edwards Walker shown in the exhibition at Palazzo Grassi. Mary was nearly 80 years old. Upon closer inspection, however, there is something that goes beyond the trousers and the top hat in the photo. It's a demeanor, a way of posing that recalls those elderly, stiff gentlemen, perhaps war veterans, who can be seen in many photographs of the time. The neoclassical building in the background adequately frames the silhouette and gives Mary Walker the appearance of a founding father. Or perhaps it's more appropriate to say, founding mother of the country. Mary Edwards Walker died in 1919. A year later, with the approval of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, American women finally obtained the right to vote. Let us leave Dr. Mary Walker and move on to observe a second photograph. In this case as well, the image documents the rise of a new female prominence, although here the subject is not an elderly suffragette, but a little girl. The author of the shot is Baron Adolphe de Meyer, the first staff photographer of Vogue, known also as the Debussy of the camera, perhaps for the soft and dreamlike style of many of his photos. De Meyer, born in Paris in 1868, had portrayed many figures of international high society, such as the famous Italian noblewoman Luisa Casati Stampa di Soncino. In this 1919 photo, however, the protagonist is a little girl. De Meyer does not use the usual sweetened language of photography and illustration depicting childhood. On the contrary, the expression of the girl is sulky. It is real, as often happens with children, but at the same time, her gaze, defiant and almost threatening, is a sign of an ambitious and determined character. Furthermore, the presence of a globe next to the girl almost seems to convey a sort of will to power. The sophisticated and intellectual little dress, combined with the bobbed haircut and bangs, places the girl, perhaps provocatively and ironically, in the aesthetics and imaginary of the flappers, a slang word that in the 20s described a movement of particularly rebellious women who danced the Charleston and loved sports cars. Let's go back to Virginia Woolf's mysterious and suggestive phrase. Let's hear it again. On or about December 1910, human nature changed. Perhaps Virginia Woolf was not referring exclusively to the more obvious changes in society, such as changes in customs, values, and the relationship between the sexes, but instead to a process that would affect human beings more deeply, in consciousness and in the structure of the mind. Let's take a photo from 1921, published in Vanity Fair. The subject is a true icon of the 20th century, Jean Cocteau, writer, playwright, director, and actor. He is on the set of one of his plays, The Wedding Party on the Eiffel Tower. Cocteau, at 22, is incredibly elegant, photographed while reading and orating in front of the tubular mouth of a giant gramophone. The gramophone, an invention of Thomas Alva Edison, was a device for recording and reproducing sound. It is thanks to the gramophone that we have astonishing documentations, such as the recorded vocal track of prominent people long past, the poet Walt Whitman.
All alike indeed, grow, ungrow, young or old, strong, ample.
However, as great-grandchildren of that world and that era, we should attempt to understand. Perhaps a reader of Vanity Fair in 1921 felt the same surprise that we can experience when faced with certain modern marvels of technology. After all, the image of young Jean Cocteau, overshadowed by the phonograph machine, describes something that touches us dearly. The start of a relationship between man and machine, leading to total fusion, hybridization. Perhaps it was also these profound transformations that Virginia Woolf was talking about, the impact on culture and the mind of scientific and technological innovation. Not to mention that in those years, the scientist Albert Einstein was questioning the very concepts of space and time.
It followed from the special theory of relativity that mass and energy are but different manifestations of the same thing, a somewhat unfamiliar conception for the average mind.
A portrait of Albert Einstein was published in a Vanity Fair issue in 1923. By then, Einstein was a 44-year-old man with graying hair, photographed in his studio, wearing a waistcoat and tie, trapped between a fading youth and budding maturity. Yet, in his gaze, we recognize that personal nuance of character, ironic and timeless, which belongs to him as much as the theory of relativity. Now let's fast forward to 1937. The world itself is in turmoil. Fascism has been in power in Italy for 15 years. Adolf Hitler's Luftwaffe has carpet-bombed the Basque village of Guernica. We are on the brink of the Second World War. In the language of photography, many things have changed, albeit slowly. Thanks in part to magazines like Vogue and Vanity Fair, fashion photography has become more receptive, exciting, and open to experimentation. Let's take, for example, a photographer and author, one of the most important photographers of the 20th century, Cecil Beaton. The title of the photo is Debutante in Evening Dress, published in Vogue in 1937. It is at the end of the exhibition room dedicated to the 30s. Even in this image, the theme is that of the relationship between the sexes. Born in London in 1904, Cecil Beaton joined Vogue as an illustrator in 1927. Beaton began taking photographs at the age of 11 and from a young age collected photos of female actors. His long career includes portraits of Greta Garbo and Marilyn Monroe, all the way up to the Rolling Stones. According to Beaton, beauty is a divine gift.
What a marvelous thing great physical beauty is. It's nothing less than a living miracle. It's not the result of achievement.
In the magnificent photo from 1937, we see 4 young women in evening gowns, holding a beautiful bouquet of flowers in their hands. Only one of the 4 women hints at a smile. The others have a serious and somber expression. Along the wall behind them, 4 sinister shadows are cast. These are not shadows cast by the bodies of the 4 women, but male shadows in tuxedos and top hats. Where do these shadows come from? To whom do they belong? The effect is eerie. In this case, Cecil Beaton contaminates fashion photography with the anxieties sown in the early 20th century by Sigmund Freud's theories on the unconscious, which deeply influenced the avant-garde and in particular, surrealism. With a little imagination, we could see in this shot the harbinger of a broader shadow, the one that would shortly thereafter envelop the world. The outbreak of World War II on September 1st, 1939. If you would like to continue your journey across the 20th century by taking a closer look at the photographs you have seen or will see at the exhibit, start the next story. We will talk about the work of photographers such as Robert Doisneau, Irving Penn, and Diane Arbus, and as for the 1940s and 1950s, war and post-war, destruction and hope, documented by the splendid photographs of Chronorama, the great exhibit at Palazzo Grassi, drawn from the Condé Nast archives.